Welcome to today's Hinckley Forum. My name is William Betterby. I'm a student staffer here at the Hinckley Institute. The Hinckley Institute of Politics is a nonpartisan institute at the University of Utah. The Hinckley provides an array of transformative experiences for students through internships, forums, and classes. Hinckley forums seek to foster public discourse and civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. Today's forum is a discussion on international affairs and careers in public service and is presented as part of UN Day, which was yesterday, October 24th. We want to thank the College of Humanities and the Department of Political Science for their partnership on this event. We are very excited to welcome Assistant Secretary of State for International Organization Affairs, Michele Sison, to our campus today. Ambassador Sison was sworn in as Assistant Secretary of State for International Organization Affairs on December 21st, 2021. She also holds the rank of Career Ambassador, the highest rank in the U.S. Foreign Service. Previously, she served as U.S. Ambassador to Haiti from February 2018 to October 2021, and as U.S. Deputy Representative to the United Nations from 2014 to 2018, where she helped build global coalitions to counter transnational threats to peace and security, and advocated for a more effective, efficient, and accountable UN system. Ambassador Sison has long experience with UN peacekeeping and the UN entities responsible for development, humanitarian relief, and human rights. Ambassador Sison served as U.S. Ambassador to Sri Lanka and Maldives, U.S. Ambassador to Lebanon, and U.S. Ambassador to the United Arab Emirates. Ambassador Sison's diplomatic assignments also include Assistant Chief of Mission in Baghdad, Iraq, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for South Asian Affairs, Deputy Chief of Mission in Islamabad, Pakistan, Consul General in Chennai, India, and tours in Cote d'Ivoire, Cameroon, Benin, and Togo. She also served as the State Department's Director of Career Development and Assignments. Ambassador Sison is the recipient of the U.S. Presidential Distinguished Service Award, U.S. Presidential Meritorious Service Award, and the U.S. Department of the Army's Outstanding Civilian Service Medal. She holds numerous U.S. Department of State awards, including ambassadorial level awards for her contributions to counter-proliferation and combating trafficking in persons. We are in for a very interesting discussion today. Please join me in welcoming our guest.
Hi, good afternoon. Really glad to be here with you. And I just wondered if I could open, since we're going to be talking about careers as well as about the UN, since yesterday was UN Day. But how many of you who are still students or members of the community are actually thinking about a career in public service, maybe the Foreign Service or an international NGO? Yay, several, many even. And I'm not even seeing the folks who are online. That is very, very encouraging. I was told that this was typically called the politics and pizza discussion. But I'm going to call this the policy and pizza discussion. I'm going to tell you why. As was just mentioned, I've been in the U.S. Foreign Service as a career diplomat for a long time. But we don't do politics. We do policy. Policy and pizza. Because as career diplomats, and I started in 1982, so that was actually during the Reagan administration. So I have served across many, many administrations over the last 40 years. So what we do is policy as it relates to our State Department work. And what I do now, heading up the Bureau of International Organizations, we're the folks who develop and then implement the policy at our U.S. representations, our U.S. missions at the United Nations General Assembly and Security Council in New York, at the Human Rights Council, and the World Health Organization in Geneva, for example, at the World Food Program and the Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome, at the International Atomic Energy Agency and the UN Office of Drugs and Crime in Vienna, the UN Environmental Program in Nairobi, the UN International Civil Aviation Organization in Montreal, the UN International Maritime Organization in London, the UN Education, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO in Paris. So those are all like US embassies to these UN entities. So whereas most of my career in all of those places that were just listed, these are 2- and 3-year tours that I had done previously in Haiti, Togo, Benin, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Maldives, UAE, Lebanon, Iraq, and then back to Haiti again. Those are all bilateral. That's the relationship between the United States and the country that I was posted in as a Foreign Service officer. But what I did in New York as the Deputy Permanent Representative, and what I do now with a big team back in Washington at the Bureau of International Organizations, is again, creating the policy positions, of course with US interagency input from USAID or Department of the Treasury or Department of Health and Human Services, along with a lot of input from Capitol Hill, from our Senate and House of Representatives staffs and members. We also promote strong and sustained US leadership at the United Nations. And we do that to advance America's national interests, promote our democratic values, and drive the needed reforms at the United Nations. So the UN, particularly when we're looking at the various humanitarian programs, food assistance, clean water, health, that we're able to make sure that the UN is able to deliver to vulnerable populations around the world, that the UN is able to go into these hot spots, these danger spots in the field where there are internally displaced or refugees, people in need, and distribute that assistance effectively, efficiently. There are so many places around the world that I've served in and that maybe you've traveled to or worked in already, where we see that the lives of vulnerable people are being lifted up by the great work of UNICEF, and again, the World Food Program, the World Health Organization, and so forth. So sure, we have a lot of bilateral programs for the United States where our US taxpayer dollars go in through USAID or the Centers for Disease Control and help people around the world in these vulnerable situations. But no one country can resolve or fix all these problems, handle all these challenges by ourselves. So we do a lot as the US, but we do a lot also through the United Nations. We are the biggest contributor, budget-wise, to UN peacekeeping. We are the biggest contributor, budget-wise, to UNICEF and the World Food Program, and to many other UN agencies, funds, and programs. But it's not just about the dollar figures of the budgets for these organizations. We engage day to day at many levels with these UN organizations. And as was mentioned, yesterday was UN Day. And so it's kind of like the UN's birthday. But what it really is, it was the 79th anniversary of the entry into force of this UN Charter. It's very small type, so it's a small booklet, but there's a lot in this booklet. We spent yesterday evening with the UN Association of Utah, so members of the community, some students, actually a very international group, folks who are very focused on lifting up the profile of the United Nations as a way to do good, as a way to help. So one of the things that I focused on yesterday was, of course, part of the commemoration of UN Day is to recognize that people from all around the world, including Americans, are working as UN humanitarian workers, as UN development experts, as UN peacekeepers. And they are often in these hot spots, these danger spots in harm's way. So one thing that we do on UN Day is to honor that service, honor those sacrifices and the sacrifices of their families. But another thing that we do on UN Day is to look back at the UN's history, its mandate and its continued relevance on the global stage. Thinking about why it's important for the UN to strengthen its ability to end conflicts, to build peace, to build human dignity, defend human dignity, to respond to the terrible humanitarian impacts of conflict and of natural disasters. And again, this charter, 79 years old, endures as a powerful declaration of these common principles, of these aspirations. And it starts with, we the people of the United Nations, we the peoples of the United Nations. So it harkens back to our own US foundational documents. So we the peoples of the United Nations, and it reaffirms faith in fundamental human rights right here on the first page. It emphasizes the dignity and worth of the human person, and it cites the need to practice tolerance and the need to live together with one another as good neighbors. So very broad and very simple statements of intent in this UN Charter. And it does endure, but it's also important to acknowledge right now, 2024, that there is immense pressure on the international framework on this UN Charter. So we saw that when one UN member state, Russia, for example, invaded another UN member state, Ukraine. This charter is under pressure. The world and the multilateral system are facing unprecedented challenges. There is conflict, but there are also global public health threats. We see new hemorrhagic fevers arising in certain parts of Southern and Central Africa, a real concern for the World Health Organization and all of us. We see human rights abuses in so many parts of the world. We see food insecurity in places like Sudan, where men, women, and children in the millions are suffering from famine or near famine level difficulties right now. So these are transnational challenges that are affecting people around the world. And because of conflict and natural disaster, the breadth and variety of these problems, a lot of people are asking the United Nations to do more. So despite the very real pressures the UN is under, we back at the State Department really do believe that the UN system is the most important game in town when it comes to tackling these huge global challenges with our partners. Because again, no one nation, not even our great country, no one nation can meet the challenges of today alone. So our belief is that this enduring promise of the UN is what should be guiding our investment. And when I talk about investment, again, it's not just the dollar figures. It's the people we put into this, it's the creative thinking we put into this, the energy we put into this as the United States, and making sure that the UN is as effective as possible. And it's also about leadership. So I can tell you that American leadership in the UN system has long been essential and continues to be essential. I want to give you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about. So I mentioned Ukraine. In building support for Ukraine's sovereignty and holding Russia to account for its brutal invasion, we have continued across the UN space, in the General Assembly, in the Human Rights Council, to call out Russian aggression while maintaining our steadfast support for Ukraine. That's the diplomatic piece. We also successfully led the charge to suspend Russia from its membership in the Human Rights Council just a few months after the February invasion 2 years ago. And then moving to the Middle East, following the horrific October 7th, 2023 Hamas terrorist attacks in Israel, we defended Israel's right to defend itself while demanding the release of all hostages at the UN Security Council. We've also called for and provided increased humanitarian aid for the civilian population, the people in Gaza, and have worked with partners to create a new mechanism to expedite, to improve humanitarian aid coordination and distribution. If you've been looking at the news this week, you've seen that Secretary of State Blinken is now, what was on his 11th trip to the Middle East since October 7th. He's in London today. So today, he met with the Jordanian foreign minister and the Lebanese caretaker prime minister. On Gaza, the discussion with Jordan today was focused on several key points. One, publicly stated, bring the war in Gaza to an end, secure the release of all hostages, alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people. And I'll go into a little more of what was announced, but that included an announcement actually made yesterday while he was still on the ground in the Middle East of an additional $135 million for food, water, sanitation assistance to the Palestinian people in Gaza, which builds on a $1.2 billion provision of humanitarian assistance in previous tranches. The discussion on Lebanon was focused on the need to bring peace back to, we don't call it a border, but a blue line, so that the Lebanese who live south of the Litani River can return to their homes, and that the Israelis who live in the north of their country can return to their homes. So some very lightning quick 4-day stops in Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar earlier this week by Secretary Blinken to try and secure release of the hostages, move again to urge the parties to end the war in Gaza, discuss the ongoing work behind the scenes to provide for security and governance and reconstruction in Gaza for the period after the war, hoping that that conflict, working for the end of that conflict to come to an end. The issues on both the Gaza side and Lebanon are of particular focus right now, of course, also because we, partners in the Middle East, partners far beyond, are also concerned that there could be a wider regional war and do not want to, no one wants to see that happen. So moving beyond, and we can certainly during the question and answer period come back to Ukraine, come back to Gaza, Lebanon, and these other hotspots, conflict zones. I mentioned the Human Rights Council. So we had been off the Human Rights Council. And back in 2021, we ran for and were reelected to the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, which enabled us once again to lead and create debates, discussions, side events, pass resolutions, create monitoring mechanisms, special rapporteurs to hold human rights violators accountable worldwide. And so that included pressing for and securing a report on human rights violations, for example, against the Uyghur population in China. We just concluded a session of the Human Rights Council on October 11th. We were able to pass resolutions and renew mandates, renew monitoring mechanisms on human rights issues pertaining to Russia, Venezuela, Syria, Sudan, Afghanistan, places all around the world where the international community agrees that we need to put added focus on calling out violations and abuses. We also put, as the U.S. mission, as the U.S. Embassy, I would say, to the Human Rights Council, a big focus on international religious freedom. And we brought our special representative for anti-Semitism, Deborah Lipstadt from Washington, to speak at the Human Rights Council, and also to focus on countering Islamophobia. So we brought our special representative for international religious freedom from Washington, from the State Department, Rashad Hussain, out to Geneva as well. So both the country-specific human rights concerns and then the broader human rights concerns, including religious freedom concerns, religious intolerance concerns. We also led an effort at the Human Rights Council on the misuse of commercial spyware targeting journalists, so protecting the freedom of journalists to do their job. So coming back to some of the geographic urgencies and coming back closer to the United States, responding to the very dire security situation in Haiti, we partnered with Ecuador at the UN Security Council to obtain Security Council authorization for a multinational security sector support mission, Kenyan-led, supported by the US, Canada, France, Spain, and many others. But this multinational security support mission going into Port-au-Prince, Haiti to counter the gang violence and to try to make it possible again for kids to go to school, for mothers to go safely to deliver babies in hospitals, for businesses to reopen. It's been a very tough time down there in Haiti. But this is part of what we've been doing in recent weeks and months on the UN side to help those folks in need down in Haiti. These transnational challenges, though, aren't just about geography or about geostrategic imperatives. Again, some of these challenges are new challenges. For example, the US in March of this year, up at the UN General Assembly in New York, sponsored the first ever UN General Assembly resolution on the safe, secure, trustworthy use of artificial intelligence to lift up the Sustainable Development Goals. So working on clean water and education and health. How do we use AI to lift up these priorities while mitigating the risks? So putting those human rights guardrails in on the use of AI. So AI for good, but recognizing there are risks and mitigating those risks. So it was the US that brought that to the General Assembly. At the UN Office of Drugs and Crime, one of the offices I mentioned that's out in Vienna, Austria, we've brought nearly 100 countries together in a global coalition to counter the use of fentanyl, to counter the use of synthetic drugs, to reduce the human cost of this terrible epidemic that's affecting our communities here in the United States and communities all around the world. We've also continued to focus both in Rome and New York and around the world on addressing global food insecurity. I mentioned Rome, not because of the great cuisine, but because the World Food Program and the Food and Agricultural Organization and the International Fund for Agricultural Development are all headquartered in Rome in this UN family. But we've put the spotlight, shown the flashlight on global food insecurity. We've generated new commitments through these efforts to expand agricultural capacity to respond to famine with these 100 partner countries. We're making sure that we focus on the needs of the developing world as they see them, rather than top down, but really engaging with our partners, both traditional and non-traditional, so that we talk about sustainable development. We make sure that we understand, is it clean water? Is it strong institutions? Is it clean energy? What is it that people in country X, Y, and Z need from us? Not just bilaterally through, say, USAID, our Agency for Bilateral Development, but also from the UN system so that we can respond more appropriately. Our leadership at the UN is also driven by incredible American personnel who work at every level. And I'm going to talk in a little while about careers at the UN and at the State Department. But we've also got some remarkable American leaders in the UN system right now. Cindy McCain, heading the World Food Program as Executive Director. Kathy Russell, another great American woman leader, as Executive Director of UNICEF. Doreen Bogdan Martin over at the International Telecommunication Union. That's the part of the UN that really ensures we've got a multi-stakeholder system of internet governance, and there's all sorts of interoperability issues that make it possible for us to use our cell phones and do lots of other great stuff with the emerging tech, and protecting our own U.S. interests and industries at the same time. Amy Pope at the International Organization for Migration, the UN agency that helps those who've been displaced by conflict or by natural disaster. So these are American leaders who are at the very top, who are at the #1 leadership positions in these UN organizations. And all of this important work in these UN organizations or at the State Department or at the U.S. Agency for International Development really depends on making sure that we've got a great throughput of talented young professionals leading the charge. And that is why I really enjoy coming out to university campuses and engaging with students. I do want to talk about the work of the State Department and our policies and programs, but I'm also really interested in talking to you as well about what I hope is an interest in international development, in international humanitarian work, international human rights protection work, foreign policy work. I was just saying to William that I actually took the Foreign Service exam when I was a senior in undergrad. It was then, and it is now. It's a free test. I was like, why not? I'm taking all these other tests. Why not? I had traveled quite a bit growing up. First generation Philippine American, so I had traveled primarily in Asia. And I was interested as a first generation American also in representing our country abroad. And so I mentioned that I've served over so many administrations. I've really felt that it's important for us to show up overseas at our embassies with the full diversity of who we are as the United States. There used to be, decades ago, this image that everyone who joined the UN's Foreign Service had gone to Princeton or Georgetown, kind of cookie cutters. So we don't actually do these talks at Princeton or Georgetown. I like to get out, especially on UN Day or UN Day week, a little further outside the Beltway and talk about what we do. Because I would love to have some resonance here and have at least a couple of you say, oh, I was thinking of taking the Foreign Service exam. Now I'm going to do it. I hope you will. My colleague Erin Tyler is with me as well. Let's see, Erin was a Peace Corps volunteer in Armenia, has served with the State Department in Algiers, Algeria, in Cote d'Ivoire, Abidjan, not at the same time, back in Washington, is headed out to another overseas assignment soon. Fingers crossed it's Armenia again. So the two of us are career Foreign Service officers who have embraced this service part of Foreign Service. We move every 2 to 3 years. We move with our families. Erin's got a little one, a 4-year-old. I raised both of my daughters in the U.S. Foreign Service. I'm a grandma now. So it's kind of a package deal. It's not sort of a 9 to 5. You do embrace it and you jump in and your family jumps in as well. We've brought a lot of information about our internship programs that we'll leave behind, and there's a QR code as well. If you're an American citizen, because there are a couple of programs that I wanted to focus on before we go into the Q&A, but if you're an American citizen thinking about the U.S. Foreign Service, thinking about becoming a U.S. diplomat, and we specialize in several different areas: political analysis, economic analysis, consular services, management administration, public affairs. I want to flag the U.S. Foreign Service internship program. And this is a really cool program that offers 2 paid summer internships. So one summer you're in Washington, D.C. at the State Department. The other summer you are at a U.S. embassy or a U.S. consulate abroad. So that's very cool, I think. And that did not exist when I was coming up. So it was actually kind of a surprise when I got to my first embassy as to what an embassy really did, because I had actually never set foot into one. I kind of thought I would be interested, and thank goodness I was. This program really does give a bird's eye view of the work of the State Department in Washington. It's typically going to be rising sophomores and juniors. We have a variety of other programs that focus on tech professionals, that focus on veterans. We've also got a big focus on reforming the UN from the inside out. So we also came prepared with some literature on the UN's Junior Professional Officer Program, which is a 2-year program, the UN Junior Professional Officer Program. We, the US State Department, work with interested Americans and this is typically someone with a master's degree, so maybe not where you are right now. But it could either be a bachelor's degree with 5 years of work experience or a master's degree with maybe 2 or 3 years of relevant work experience. But this is something to think about if you're interested in working for the United Nations, because it's an entry-level position for 2 years, and then it's a great shot at a pipeline into the mid-level and beyond. But again, because we are really interested in making sure that the UN is effective and efficient, one of the best ways is to get well-qualified Americans into the pipeline. So I'm going to stop there. I know we might have some questions come in online, so you're going to take a look at that computer screen for me. And I'd love to have questions, comments, thoughts from anyone, please.
So everyone, I have the mic. Just please wait till you have the mic to ask your question for our audience. Thank you.
So, hello, thank you so much for your wonderful speech. And for me personally, I am very interested in in working in international development or international humanitarian work, or even foreign policy work in the future. So I just would like to know if there's, like, as an undergrad, what kind of expertise that are needed in working in those fields in the future, and as an undergrad, like, what kind of efforts I can make from now on so that I can have better competency in working in those fields in the future.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And Aaron, I know, is putting back in the back some of the flyers. So I'll start with the U.S. side. Some of the humanitarian work actually is done at the State Department, and others parts of our humanitarian work is carried out by USAID. At the State Department, we have a bureau, a sister bureau, Refugees, Migration, and Population. And that's the part of the State Department that supports with us the work of the UN High Commission for Refugees, the work of the International Organization for Migration that I mentioned, and similarly, USAID is actually supporting those same two organizations. Great question coming from an audience here in Utah, because you may or may not be aware that, Salt Lake City is one of the biggest and most important refugee resettlement centers in the United States. And we talked a little bit last night at the UN Association event about the opportunities with Welcome Corps, the new private community welcoming new refugees to our countries through community and family efforts. So yes, I would definitely take a look at the U.S. Foreign Service Internship Program, because working either with our IO Bureau or our Bureau for Population, Refugees, and Migration would be a great bird's eye view there. USAID also has their own internship programs. They have their own Bureau of Humanitarian Affairs that will work also very specifically on food assistance, clean water and sanitation assistance, education assistance, so other aspects of both humanitarian and development work. A lot of people around the world depend upon the UN and our own U.S. programs, especially in these post-conflict and post-conflict zones. Please. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Mary, and I'm an Algerian American, and so an issue that's really dear to me is the Palestinian and Israeli conflict. And so my question just kind of focuses on the U.S. UN ambassadors. And so the Algerian UN ambassador, Amar bin Jama, said that when calling for an immediate ceasefire, a vote in favor for this draft is a support of the Palestinians' right to live. And so opposing that vote was the U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield. And so my question to you is, would you say that there is a clear bias for Israel, seeing that it is the ally of the U.S., and just kind of comparing that to Ukraine and Russia's conflict and how the U.S. responded to that, and just kind of like what the plan for U.S. UN ambassadors to kind of like check Israel when obviously they are exploiting the UN in some ways, or the U.S. in some ways for money, and when they're like committing atrocities, especially towards the people of Gaza, and just kind of like, what the U.S. has in plan for that.
Thanks for that very important question. And it is a really pressing time for the people of Gaza, for the men, women, and children who are suffering, and it is only getting worse, especially in the north, especially in terms of food security. So the first part of your question on what the permanent representative of Algeria had said, if I remember correctly, because there have been a couple actually resolutions and votes in the UN Security Council, but that particular resolution was a resolution that had been put forward that actually didn't mention the hostages, and it didn't mention Hamas. So our issue with that resolution, and we actually did put forward our own language as well, but our problem with that resolution was, where did October 7th start? It was the Hamas terrorist attack. So we felt that Hamas needed to be mentioned. And we also felt that the hostages, not just American hostages or Israeli hostages, but they're hostages from dozens of countries around the world. So that was our issue with that particular formulation of that resolution. So yesterday, when Secretary Blinken was in Qatar, there was a discussion in a stand-up press conference that he did with his Qatari host, where it was discussed that there would be a resumption of negotiations on a Gaza ceasefire in the coming days. And it was left a little bit undefined. We didn't hear a date from either the Secretary or the Qatari side, because the Qataris have been the mediators, if you will. But what was announced, and I mentioned that the Secretary had come forward with this additional announcement of $135 million for the Palestinians' population in Gaza, badly needed. But he also at the same time said, look, we are seeking a plan so that Israel can withdraw, so that Hamas cannot reconstitute and ever launch something like October 7th again, so that the Palestinian people can rebuild their lives and rebuild their futures, and so that we can also make sure that all the hostages can come home. So we don't know yet if Hamas is prepared to engage, and I think that's why we didn't hear a specific date, like it's going to start next Monday or it's going to start in 2 weeks, because we have not yet heard. The aspect you mentioned of comparability, and others have raised this. You have Russia invade Ukraine. There are Security Council sessions and sessions in the General Assembly. I would argue that both situations are terrible situations in the sense there's human suffering. Men, women, and children, civilians are impacted in Ukraine. We've got 1.5 million children who have been stolen by Russia, for want of a better word. Farmers have had their crops destroyed. The conflict continues. And then certainly the suffering in Gaza is enormous, What you saw when the Hamas leader, Sinwar, died. You saw Secretary of State Blinken talk about this is a moment. It created an opportunity, a moment to bring the war to an end, to ensure Israel's security. It's a moment to move forward. So, you know, the visit, and again, Secretary Blinken, you know, Israel, then Saudi Arabia, then Qatar, and now the meetings with Middle East and other leaders today in London, has made clear every step of the way to the Israelis, to every other interlocutor that he's met with, that it's time to end the war in Gaza in a way that provides lasting security for Palestinians, for Israelis, and everyone in the region. I wish I had a crystal ball and I could say that these negotiations are going to take place this month and that we're going to see success. What I can say is that there are a lot of very dedicated American and UN public servants working to bring this to an end. It is hard for me as someone who served in the region to see the winter coming, to see the questions raised on the blockage of food coming in. Voices have been raised, conversations, both behind closed doors and in public from very senior levels of our government have made clear our severe, severe, severe concern about this humanitarian disaster that's occurring. So a really important questions, and I'm glad you asked it. Right behind you, although I saw a hand peripherally here too.
Hi, my name is Daniel Jimenez. I'm a student here at the university. Just to continue on this kind of thought path, you mentioned speaking on the U.S.-led leadership that we present within the United Nations, specifically on like bringing U.S. ideals of democracy throughout wherever we help, and specifically on the fact that we do not impose our democracy and allow like self-actualization for developing nations. So my question to you is how do we reconcile that when, you know, one of our greatest allies, Prime Minister Netanyahu, has many times stated that he does not believe in a two-state solution, and there's been many recorded border skirmishes between Palestine and Israel over the years, over the decades, that I'm sure you've seen in your time out there. Mm-hmm. How do we reconcile that as the U.S. and the United Nations believing what we believe in, but then still giving some billions of dollars towards Israel and towards what is effectively genocide in the Middle East?
So I'm glad, again, we're bringing these questions up. I'm going to take the first piece, Middle East specific, and then I'm going to take the sort of broader question about bringing American values to the work that we do through the UN worldwide. So Secretary Blinken earlier this week met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, with Defense Minister Gallant. In each of those conversations, the need for Israel to take additional steps now to increase and sustain the flow of humanitarian assistance into Gaza and to ensure that the assistance isn't just held, but is able to reach the civilians throughout Gaza was the key part of the conversation. And that was articulated by the Secretary at each stop and in the stand-ups, the press conferences and the readouts that he did while he was in the region. You may have seen reference in the press, in the media, to the letter that Secretary Blinken and Secretary of Defense Austin also sent, articulating a number of steps focused on the immediate need for the flow of humanitarian assistance. Stepping back on the bringing our American values, bringing democratic values. So when we look at not to get real UN speak, but the Sustainable Development Goals. We talk about the need for strong institutions, for our work in countries all around the world, Middle East, Africa, Latin America, South Asia, Pacific Islands, to make sure that what we do in our rule of law and justice sector, in our elected assistance, strengthens these institutions. There are a lot of places around the world, and many of the places in which I've worked, in which an electoral system or electoral council is not independent, in which judicial selections are not run in an independent way, in which the court system is not trusted. So when you have an electoral system where the results are not trusted or accepted by the population, or a court system where the results are not respected by the population, that can often lead to conflict. So when we talk about bringing our American values and democratic values to the work that we do at the United Nations, I'm also talking about the work that we do through, say, the UN Development Program on rule of law and justice sector, the work we do through the UN Office of Drugs and Crime, and a variety of anti-corruption efforts around the world too. Haiti is another example where the anti-corruption work and the rule of law work continues and is much needed and will be needed beyond this immediate phase of countering the gangs. I see two hands. I think you in the white sweatshirt were first, but you're very quick. Then we'll go right in front.
So just building upon, like you just mentioned, rule of law, it's something that we hold very dearly as Americans, and we try to exemplify that. And you've named a few cases where the U.S. has done a good job in that. However, there's also, going back to Israel and Gaza, there's been indictments leveled by the ICC against the Israeli government for their role in the war. And the U.S. has come out against it, and if not, had a very mixed reaction to that. That definitely does not look like it seems to benefit the rule of law because of the exception that they are U.S. allies. So how do you respond to that?
Another great question. So we've got the ICC, which looks at the criminal prosecution of international cases. We have the International Court of Justice, the UN's Court of Justice, that typically does more on the side of border disputes, but has also weighed in on some of these issues. The US position is actually very much based on the work of a very dedicated and, again, career public service group of State Department, international human rights lawyers, humanitarian law lawyers, treaty lawyers, who actually, I'm not a lawyer, and I will say that first up, I'm a Foreign Service officer and a diplomat, but the way that we construct our positions when responding to a case at the International Court of Justice or at the ICC, very, very carefully constructed analyses by our State Department and other attorney advisors. So I will say that that commitment to rule of law is genuine. This is not a place where any of us would wade who do not have that intense legal background. But these are important questions, and these are the questions you should be asking. Please. Oh, the microphone went away.
After this, we have a question from the online audience.
Sure.
Wonderful. A couple weeks ago, we had Senator Mike Lee coming in here and talking about the REINS Act, which would put a lot of the bureaucratic processes back into to Congress. And I was just wondering, as a member of the U.S. Department of State, how would the passage of such a law affect the kind of day-to-day operations of your administration?
Yeah, so I can't respond specifically to the draft legislation because I actually haven't seen the draft as it exists. But again, kind of going back to the rule of law, we comply with all relevant U.S. law, right? That's how our system works, with legislative, our legislative bodies. So if there is a law that is duly passed by Capitol Hill, by our Congress, we would, as the U.S. State Department, as the U.S. Foreign Service, be in full compliance of that law. But it's draft legislation at this time, so it'd be talking about a theoretical. But I will say, and I'm going to digress for a minute because, again, many of you were maybe looking at internships in a foreign affairs agency, or studying foreign languages, or focusing on geographic studies. When folks ask me, what do you think is most important on the route to perhaps becoming a Foreign Service officer, I always say do an internship on Capitol Hill or in the local office of your representative or senator. And it's something that I did while I was in college, and I was very glad that I did, because how do we develop our foreign policy? It is not just the experts at the State Department working with other parts of the administration, whichever administration it is. There is daily, and I mean daily, back and forth with Senate staff, with House of Representatives staff, with the senators and the representatives themselves. We are often asked to comment on draft legislation as well. We welcome countless staff delegations, senatorial delegations, House of Representative delegations to our missions abroad, so that they can see what's going on in country X, Y, or Z, and also what the embassy is doing in country X, Y, and Z. But my advice, it really is, if you're interested in a foreign affairs career, go and work, not necessarily on the staff of someone, or intern on the staff of someone who's on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee or the House Foreign Affairs Committee, but also just to get a better sense of how our legislature works, because it has an enormous impact, not just on the budgets for all of these programs that I'm talking about, bilateral or through the UN, but how we develop our policy. And for example, we go up on a monthly basis, like clockwork, to brief on every single UN peacekeeping mission. We should, because we just put $1.2 billion in last month of September to support, of US taxpayer money, to support those missions in places like South Sudan, Central African Republic, Lebanon, places that perhaps we would not want to send our military or police, but we do want to support that burden sharing of rest of world coming in to try to protect civilians, maintain access for humanitarian assistance, and so forth. So I digress for a moment, because it is really important, I think, for us all to understand how that interaction between Capitol Hill and all of the departments of agencies of any administration has got to work. Online question.
So related to that, what are the most important skills for a career in these type of fields that we as undergraduates can focus on right now? And I guess I'll just add to, like, what do you think the biggest issues are for our generation will be in the future that you think we should become informed on and start thinking about?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. There are some things that I feel like I can say definitively. Here we are in 2024, looking at in an audience. I can't see the online audience, but the audience in front of me. So in the next 10, 20, 30 years, your international affairs career, well, you'll probably be looking at strategic competition. What is the People's Republic of China, in particular, doing in terms of economic and trade diplomacy? What is the PRC doing in terms of the rules of the road for emerging technologies? So those of you who have an interest in focusing on China, including language studies, I think that's an excellent investment also for our own national interests. But some things I think are harder to predict. So when I came in, if you had said artificial intelligence as a subject that every single Foreign Service officer should be conversant in, or neuroscience, or environmental diplomacy, those were not things when I came into the Foreign Service, but they are very much part of what we all need to be conversant in these days. The UN Security Council typically a decade ago would talk about peace and security, conflict issues, but now we talk about food security because scrambling for food or water resources can lead to conflict. So looking at some of these more technical issues such as cyber, AI, other emerging technologies, I think would also be a good pathway. But more broadly, what do you need to come in? I think a love for our country and the desire to show the rest of the world who we are as Americans. Because when you go out and you serve in a posting abroad, sure, they see you as an individual. I'm Michele Sison, but they also see me as the US flag, right? So it's all of that history, all of those policies, all of that complexity, and a lot of folks aren't going to agree with our policies. So the ability to go out there and show up as an individual, as a human being, to connect with other people, to enjoy that people-to-people aspect of our work, and also to have an innate curiosity, I think, about lifelong learning, learning about other cultures, about others' experiences, about others' histories, because we're not always on transmit. It should always be a conversation. But it's a great question from online.
So I think we are about out of time, so I'll pass up to you if you have any closing remarks you want to make.
Well, I just wanted to say that I'm going to hang back for a couple of minutes with Erin, my colleague. If there were questions that you didn't have time to ask, or if you were curious about anything that we spoke about in terms of careers with the Foreign Service, or hard questions that you just want to hit me up on one-on-one, we'll hang back for a few minutes if you don't have another class or engagement to hustle off to. But thank you very much for coming out today.